Look, there is this almost sacred rule in North America that we've all had drilled into our heads since we were kids. Renting is throwing your money away, buying a house is the ultimate sign of being a responsible adult, and if you're writing a rent check every month, you're basically setting your net worth on fire. And the wild thing is, almost nobody ever stops to actually open a spreadsheet and check if that's true. We just buy into it because our parents said so, our coworkers said so, and, well, society kind of demands it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, remember right after we got married, how much pressure we felt every time someone asked, "So, when are you guys finally getting a place?" Like renting an apartment somehow meant we were failing at adulthood.
Exactly, and that's why we're digging into this today on Top and Wonder. Because whether you're trying to figure out your next lease or staring at the biggest six-figure purchase of your entire life, you deserve the real math, not just cultural slogans. So, let's start with a real-world test. I want to look at an exact property, no theoretical nonsense. Take a unit at 776 Bryant Street in Palo Alto, California. It's a two-bedroom, two-bath condo, roughly 1,521 square feet. Back in 2018, this place sold for $2,150,000.
Okay, Palo Alto is obviously Silicon Valley money, but keep going.
Right, it's an extreme market, but the mechanics work everywhere. Now, if you look at current estimates today, the value is actually dropped by about $154,000, so let's call it around $1,900,000. Now, if you bought that place with 20% down at a 7% interest rate, your mortgage payment alone, just the principal and interest, would run you $10,624 every single month.
$10,600 a month just for the loan?
Just the mortgage. Now, here is where it gets crazy. That exact same unit was rented out in January for $5,400 a month.
Wait, so living in the exact same physical space as a tenant costs literally half of what it costs to own it?
Half, more than $5,000 less per month. And keep in mind, that $10,000 owner figure doesn't even touch property taxes, HOA fees, insurance, and what I call phantom maintenance costs. On paper, renting that home puts over $5,000 cash back in your pocket every 30 days.
Okay, but Frank, if you say that out loud at any dinner party, people will immediately jump on you and say, "Yeah, but Lynn, that 5,000 rent is gone forever. The buyer is building equity and the renter is just paying their landlord's mortgage." Isn't that
Ah, the landlord's mortgage myth. See, that right there is the exact psychological trap. Because the moment you look at how landlords actually price rent and how mortgage interest actually works, the entire argument completely falls apart. People have this bizarre fantasy that landlords sit in a leather chair, look at their monthly mortgage of, say, $2,000 and go, aha, let me just tack on 10% for my Cabo vacation and charge $2,200. Scoff. That is not how the world works. A landlord can only charge whatever the open market will bear. Period. If landlords could just magically pass on all their expenses plus a guaranteed profit, why would they stop at 10%? Why not charge 50%? Why not double it?
because nobody would rent it?
Exactly. The market dictates the rent, not the landlord's mortgage. Half the time, mom and pop landlords don't even know their own real costs. They don't know how to amortize an $8,000 roof repair over 11 years. And the second they face one single month of vacancy, their entire annual profit margin is wiped off the map. And that brings us to the second huge myth, this idea that rent is flushing cash down the toilet. But think about how hypocritical we are about this. If you go out to a nice Italian restaurant in the city, spend, I don't know, $30 or $40 on a handmade pasta dinner with great wine, did you just throw your money away?
Well, no, of course not. You paid for the chef's culinary skill, the service, the ambiance, and honestly, the fact that I don't have to spend an hour scrubbing pots and pans afterward.
You paid for pure value. You traded dollars for food, convenience, and a great evening. Rent is literally the exact same transaction. You're trading money for a safe roof over your head, a location close to your job, and the priceless luxury of never having to spend your Saturday morning wandering through Home Depot trying to fix a busted water heater. But the biggest sacred cow of all is the third myth, the magic word in American culture: equity. People treat equity like this instant golden ticket. Oh, Frank, I have to buy because I'm building equity from day one. Well, no, wait, let's actually look at the math that 99% of buyers never look at, the loan amortization table.
Okay, explain that, because people genuinely believe that every monthly mortgage check is secretly going into their personal piggy bank.
Right, and that belief is costing people hundreds of thousands of dollars. Take that same Palo Alto loan, a 30-year fixed mortgage of about $1,590,000 at 7% interest. In the early years, almost your entire monthly payment is vaporized into pure interest.
Wait, how long does that last?
On that loan, it takes 21 years. 21 years of monthly checks before you pay even $1 more toward your actual principal than you're paying in pure interest to the bank.
Wait, Frank, stop. 21 years? So for over 2 decades, the bank is taking almost all of the pie, and buyers are bragging about building wealth?
Exactly. And here's the kicker. That's assuming you only have to pay the bank. It doesn't even touch the 30 to 50% in hidden phantom costs waiting right around the corner. Still mid-thought, trailing off. And this is the golden rule every homeowner eventually learns the hard way. Rent is the maximum you will pay for housing, but your mortgage is only the absolute minimum.
Oof, that line hits home. Because when the plumbing explodes on a Sunday night, the landlord gets the 3 a.m. text, not you.
Exactly. When you rent, your ceiling is locked in. When you own, that monthly mortgage check is just the baseline ticket to enter the carnival. You still have property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, and what financial planners call phantom maintenance costs. The general rule of thumb for maintenance is 1 to 3% of the total purchase price of the home every single year. So on an $800,000 house, which is pretty standard in a lot of suburbs these days, that's $8,000 to $24,000 a year just setting aside cash for things like a dying water heater, roof wear, or the HVAC unit giving up the ghost in the dead of winter.
And don't forget the renovations. How many couples do we know who drop $40,000 on custom quartz countertops and tell themselves with a straight face, "It's okay, honey, it's an investment"?
It's never an investment. You almost never get a dollar-for-dollar return on a renovated kitchen. It's consumer spending, which is totally fine if you love it, but let's stop pretending it's an asset class. Now, let's take all of this, the phantom costs, the maintenance, the taxes, and plug it into a real rent versus buy model. Let's go back to that Palo Alto condo at $1,900,000 versus $5,400 in rent. Most people assume, well, if I hold it for 30 years, I win. But in reality, the average American only stays in a home for about 8 years.
Right, because of job changes, kids, downsizing, life happens.
Life happens. So if we run an 8-year timeline with a 20% down payment, a 7% mortgage, and a very conservative 2% for maintenance, buying that place actually costs you $800,000 more than renting.
$800,000 more to own?
And that's before we factor in the single biggest wealth killer in real estate, the opportunity cost of your capital. If you take that 20% down payment, which is $380,000 in cash, plus the $5,000 monthly cash savings from renting, and you just put it in a boring broad market index fund growing at 7%, over 8 years, the renter comes out ahead by more than $1.1 million in liquid net worth.
$1.1 million. That completely flips the script on the whole renting is throwing money away argument.
Totally destroys it. But look, this doesn't mean you should never buy a house. It just means you cannot buy based on emotional pressure or blindly trusting a broker who wants to make a commission. There are 2 concrete financial hurdles you have to clear first to know if you're actually ready to buy. to look. And the very first test is what financial planners call the 28-36 rule. Here's how it works. Rule number 1, your total monthly housing cost should never exceed 28% of your gross monthly income. That's your income before taxes. And when I say total housing cost, I don't just mean the mortgage check. I mean property taxes, homeowner's insurance, HOA fees, and that lawnmower tune-up you have to pay for in April. Everything.
Right, which is why when people say, oh, my mortgage is only 25% of my paycheck, they're usually forgetting that another 10% is quietly slipping out the back door for utilities and maintenance.
Exactly. Now, in crazy expensive cities like New York, San Francisco, or Toronto, people love to stretch that number to 32 or even 34%. But look, every single percentage point you stretch above 28 is pure financial risk. You're basically shaving off your safety buffer. But the second half of the rule is where people really get wiped out, the 36% cap. Your total household debt, which includes your housing cost, plus your car payments, student loans, and credit card minimums, cannot exceed 36% of your gross monthly income.
Okay, let's put some real flesh on those bones. Walk us through what that actually looks like for a normal couple.
Take our classic scenario. Let's look at David and Sarah. Let's say together they make $75,000 a year, which works out to $6,250 a month before taxes. If they follow the housing rule, their maximum housing cost at 28% is $1,750 a month. Now, on paper, they feel pretty good about themselves. They think, hey, we're under 28%, let's go buy that starter home. But, and this is the part almost nobody checks, they also have a $500 car payment and $500 going toward credit card balances every month. That's an extra $1,000 in debt service.
Which is, wait, 1,000 divided by 6,250, that's 16% of their income just servicing non-mortgage debt.
Exactly, 16%. So you take their 28% housing cost, add their 16% debt load, and suddenly David and Sarah are sitting at a 28-44 ratio.
44%. That's way past the 36% red line.
They are in the danger zone. It's like trying to swim across a lake with a 20-pound weight strapped to your ankle. One unexpected medical bill, one layoff, or one blown transmission, and the whole house of cards collapses. Reflective tone. The only way you can even consider stretching those numbers is if you have absolutely zero consumer debt, no car loans, no student loans, and you can still comfortably save 10% and invest 10% of your take-home pay every single month.
Okay, so that's hurdle number 1, passing the 28-36 ratio. But you mentioned there's a second question, the one that always makes the entire internet furious whenever you bring it up.
Oh, people hate this rule. Question number 2. Have you saved a 20% down payment in cash? The second you say that on the internet, the comment section lights on fire. People go, Frank, that's impossible. In my city, 20% is $150,000. That'll take me 5 years to save.
Which is honestly pretty relatable. But you don't even recommend the 20% rule just to avoid paying PMI, right?
Exactly. Private mortgage insurance is just a minor mathematical fee. The real reason you need to be able to save 20% is psychological conditioning. Saving a large sum of cash builds the exact financial muscle memory you need before a $4,000 sewer line cracks open under your driveway. If saving 20% feels completely impossible on your current income, how are you going to handle a surprise $9,000 HVAC replacement 2 months after you get the keys? You won't. You'll put it on a credit card at 24% interest.
Right. And just to be clear for everyone listening, you're not saying you must put 20% down at closing. If mortgage rates are low and the math makes sense to put 5 or 10% down while keeping the rest invested, that's fine. But you should have the capacity to save that 20% before taking the leap.
It's spot on, honey. That's the entire difference between buying from a position of strength versus buying out of fear of missing out. And look, at the end of the day, buying a house isn't purely a spreadsheet equation. There are plenty of fantastic non-financial reasons to buy a house. Maybe you have kids and you want the stability of a specific school district. Maybe your parents are moving in with you. Maybe you genuinely love landscaping, painting walls, and making a space truly yours. Those are beautiful, rich life reasons to own.
But notice what wasn't on that list: buying a house because you think it's a guaranteed lottery ticket that only goes up, or buying because society made you feel guilty about signing a lease.
Exactly. Renting isn't throwing money away, it's buying freedom, flexibility, and buying time to compound your wealth in the market. And buying isn't an automatic victory, it's a long-term lifestyle commitment that requires serious financial readiness.
Run your own numbers, protect your cash flow, and never let anyone else's expectations dictate how you build your life.
Hit subscribe if you love having these honest money conversations with us. Save this episode for when you're looking at your next lease or pre-approval, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.
Take care, everyone.